Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. And if you're a true General Hospital fan, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get started with today's video. The General Hospital, GH, recap for Friday, July 24th, shows that Willow Kane's, Caitlin McMullen, attempt to depart Port Charles was thwarted, while Nina Reeves, Cynthia Watros, took dramatic measures against Drew Kane. Valentine Cassadine, James Patrick Stewart, apologized to Alexis Davis, Nancy Lee Grahn, for the attention she received while he was hiding, and he disclosed his plan to utilize the WSB to unfreeze his assets. Jocelyn Jacks, Eden McCoy, returned to work at Jack Brennan's, Chris McKenna, office and ended up attending his meeting with Britt Westbourne, Kelly Thibault. Brennan questioned Britt about the lost black box, which she had no knowledge of. Britt was late for work as a result, and Elizabeth Baldwin, Rebecca Herbst, reported her for it. Lucas Jones, Van Hansis, and Britt also had a few disagreements, making her return to GH difficult. Back with Jocelyn, she questioned Brennan about the black box, suspecting it was about regaining his own secrets. Brennan made it plain that the contents of the box were secret, and Jocelyn accepted this. Danny Morgan, Asher and Tonizan arrived at the Quartermain property with Jason Morgan, Steve Burton, which made Rocco Falconeri, Finn Carr, very uncomfortable. Willow indicated wanting to talk with the WSB about something, which piqued Jason's interest as she left Drew in Nina's custody. Jason sought a new chapter with Drew, eventually inviting Rocco inside for a private talk. That caused Jason to assure Rocco that his WSB imprisonment was not his fault. Jason pledged to continue protecting Rocco if necessary, but he felt the WSB wanted to put this behind them. Rocco struggled with the shooting, but Jason encouraged him to find a way to let go. Jason then went to the hospital, where Britt greeted him warmly. Meanwhile, Scout Quartermain, Caden Brenna Tokarski, and Danny attempted to bring the family back together by speaking with Drew. Next, Elizabeth Baldwin, Rebecca Herbst, saw Willow hadn't followed up on the appointment for Drew's communication tools, so she paid her a visit in her office. Liz wondered why Willow didn't want to give Drew a voice. Willow pretended she didn't want to deal with the issues in her marriage, while Drew spoke through a machine. Willow, on the other hand, eventually agreed with Elizabeth that Drew needed to be able to communicate and promised to set it up. Willow received a phone call from Brennan about not having the leverage he had promised. Willow thought time was running out because she didn't have any more paralytic dosages for Drew. Brennan still wanted to help Nina and Willow, so he gave the kids an escape by plane, as well as new identities. Willow eventually called Nina to tell her about everything, but she let her mother decide whether or not to accompany her and the children. Nina was alone with Drew by the boathouse when he asked whether she had received terrible news. After Nina argued it was worse for Drew, she shoved his wheelchair and threw him into the water. At the PCPD, Dante Falconeri, Dominic Zamprogna, mentioned that Anna Devane, Finola Hughes, wanted Harrison Chase, Josh Swickard, to be his partner again after Chase was restored as a detective. With that in mind, Dante sought to rebuild trust by allowing Chase to bring Willow in to question himself. Since Ezra Boyle, Daniel Cosgrove, was pointing the finger at Willow for her connection to Sidwell, Chase decided that going to get Willow would make things go better. Chase arrived just as Willow was about to head home and prepare for the escape Brennan promised, and offered to accompany her to the police station. Valentine ran into Jocelyn outside Brennan's WSB office door. Valentine also contacted Brennan and startled him by proposing a deal on the black box. According to General Hospital teasers, Valentine will drive a hard bargain, so watch for Brennan's reaction. The afternoon sun hung low over the Quartermain estate, leaving long golden streaks on the lake's calm surface. The boathouse remained silent save for the smooth lap of water on the pilings and the occasional groan of wood settling in the heat. Scout and Danny had just left, waving over their shoulders as they approached Bobby's to meet Alexis. Nina had smiled tightly, promising to get Drew home safely. The smile disappeared as their footsteps faded. Drew sat at the edge of the pier, his wheelchair's brakes locked and his body as still as stone. For weeks, the paralytic had kept him silent and motionless, a prisoner in his own body. Nina had assured herself it was just temporary, a necessary evil, until Jack Brennan delivered the black box that would keep Drew under constant supervision. but the box was gone. Jack had called earlier with the shocking news that upended every well-set strategy. There was no more leverage. Drew will regain his voice soon. The last dose of the medicine was already in his system, making him thinner by the hour. Nina's phone rang while the children were still around. Willow's voice on the other end was strained and urgent. "Listen to me, Mom. Jack cannot find the box. He claims the only way out is to leave. Tonight. There is an airplane. I can create new identities for myself, my children, and you if you prefer. I'm getting what I can from the house and picking up the kids at Lila's." We had to leave before Drew begins chatting. Nina moved away from the dock, her heart racing. "Slow down, Willow. Running means everything. Your life here, the kids' schools, all we've established. There's nothing else to build on," Willow replied. "Liz was just in my office. She's pushing hard for the communication device. She senses something is awry. Chase is circling. Once Drew can speak, we're done. Jack is promising us a clean break. Think about it. Call me back when you've made your decision." The connection went dead. Nina stood stopped, peering into the dark sea. She dialed Jack's number and received voicemail. Her voice cracked as she delivered the message. "Jack, this is Nina. Call me the moment you receive this. Before someone does anything irreversible." She hung up and turned back to Drew. His head was slightly inclined, eyes open but unfocused, as they had been for days. She walked closer, the dock boards groaning beneath her feet. Her hands trembled as she sought for the wheelchair's brake levers. One click. Two. The chair rolled an inch forward due to its own weight. Drew's voice, hoarse and low, broke through the silence. "What's wrong, Nina? Got some awful news." She sprang upright, letting out a piercing cry before she could control it. He looked at her, really looking. The paralysis was ending. The final dose had failed. "Bad for me," she murmured, her words sounding flat and frigid. "Worse for you." She pushed. The wheelchair sped forward. Drew's body shook when the front wheels hit the dock's edge. He hung there for a single suspended second, his eyes wide with abrupt realization. Then gravity overtook him. The chair tipped, the metal frame glittering in the sunlight, and he dove into the lake with a loud splash, sending water rushing over the pilings. Bubbles rose in frenetic torrents. The chair sank, pulling him down. Nina stood at the edge, chest heaving, staring at the point where the surface had closed over him. The water became calm too quickly. No thrashing. There was no scream for rescue. Only the gentle, relentless lap of the lake against the wood. Willow stood in her congressional office across Port Charles, shaking hands as she packed a single bag. Jack's call came just minutes after Liz Weber had left. Liz had been cordial but direct, apologizing for the county report about probable contaminants in the house before asking Drew about the communication device he still lacked. "He is your husband, Willow." Willow agreed to schedule the installation the next week, anything to get Liz out the door. The second the nurse left, Jack's name appeared on the screen. "I can't find it," he said without explanation. "The package is gone. Someone got there first. You no longer have leverage. I can still get you out. The plane is ready. New papers for you, your children, and Nina if she wants them." Willow had called her mother immediately, her voice held steady only by willpower. On paper, the plan was simple. Stop by the house, gather the necessities, pick up Scout and Danny, and drive to the airport. By daylight, they'd become ghosts. She nearly believed it till the knock came on her office door. Chase stood there in his uniform with a carefully bland attitude. "Willow, I need you to accompany me to the station. Just a few inquiries." She looked at him, her bag still open on the desk. The escape route had reduced to a single, unattainable thread. Britt Westbourne had spent the afternoon wandering the hospital's familiar corridors with a mix of determination and dread. Her late entrance had already elicited angry stares from the personnel. She had ignored them, concentrating on the charts in front of her, until she turned a corner and noticed Elizabeth and Lucas looking through apartment listings at the nurse's station. The casual way they stood together, heads bent close, sparked an unexpected surge of jealousy in her chest. She hurriedly turned aside, but stopped short when she looked up again. Jason Morgan was approaching her along the hallway, Danny by his side. The years slipped past in an instant. Britt's breath caught. Jason's gaze locked on hers. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Danny shifted, breaking the magic, and Britt felt the old, confused surge of emotion she had never quite learned to suppress. Jason had arrived at the lake first that afternoon, looking for Willow to discuss Danny and Scout's living arrangements. Willow had put him off, claiming she would be busy for the next few days. Jason accepted it with the placid patience that had always defined him, then led Rocco aside for a private talk near the boathouse. Rocco had felt the weight of his WSB incarceration like a stone in his chest. Jason's voice remained firm as he told the young guy that it was not his responsibility and that the decisions of others did not define him. Rocco nodded, his eyes glowing, and the tension between them lessened. Nina had not moved since she arrived back at the dock. The sun continued its steady descent. Somewhere, a bird called. The bubbles had ceased. She moved one step closer to the brink, then another, as if the sea itself could provide an answer. Her phone stayed silent. Jack hadn't called back. Willow was somewhere in town, possibly in Chase's custody. If they did not arrive on time, the plane would depart without them. Nina's mind raced with the consequences. Drew would speak if he surfaced, assuming he survived. He would reveal everything: the drug, the extortion, and the weeks of silence they had imposed on him. Willow's career would come to an end. The children would be abducted. Nina herself would face charges that could never be dropped. The shove was completely instinctual and irreversible. Now the water held the only secret that mattered. She crouched at the edge of the dock, her fingers gripping the slick wood. The water stayed calm. No hand cracked the surface. There was no gasp of air. Only the silent, ceaseless movement of the lake against the pilings, taking Drew Kane's remains deeper into the darkness. Across town, the clock was ticking toward evening. Willow sat in the passenger seat of Chase's automobile, her suitcase left on the office floor, peering out at the streets of Port Charles as they passed. Chase had given only the required instructions. She wondered whether he already knew more than he admitted, and if Dante's test for him involved bringing her in before she vanished. She wondered if Nina had decided to accompany them, or if her mother was still standing on the dock, hoping for a miracle that would never come. At the hospital, Jason and Britt faced each other in the corridor, years of separation and sadness between them. Danny waited a few steps away, feeling the weight of the occasion but not understanding it. Britt's hand squeezed at her side. Jason's look was unreadable, the same meticulous mask he had worn when he first awoke from the dead. Nina Reeves remained alone on the lake, dealing with the effects of a single, desperate shove. The wheelchair was gone. Drew was gone. The only sound left was the smooth, steady cadence of water against wood, like if the lake were breathing and waiting to see what she would do next. The afternoon light faded to reveal the first traces of dusk. A plane sat somewhere on a private runway, engines cooling, papers ready, and new identities printed on never-before-used documents. Willow's escape had been thwarted by a knock at the door and a missing black box. Nina's solution was simultaneously final and unfinished. Drew Kane was beneath the surface of Quartermain Lake, and those who had attempted to quiet him were left standing on opposite sides of Port Charles, confronting a future that had just crumbled into the water with a single splash. Nina eventually rose to her feet. Her legs felt wobbly. She gazed again at the spot where the chair had vanished, then turned and walked back toward the boathouse, clutching her phone like a lifeline that had already failed. The message she had left for Jack remained unanswered in the air. Willow's voice was still echoing in her ears. The children's giggling from earlier in the day seemed to belong in another lifetime. She stepped inside the boathouse and slammed the door behind her, blocking the view of the lake. The inside was dim and cold. She slumped against the wall, eyes closed, waiting for the next sound. Any sound that would tell her if the decision she had taken would preserve or destroy everything that remained. The tension that had been building in Port Charles for weeks finally broke on a steamy Friday afternoon that felt like the quiet before an impending storm. Willow Kane stood in her congressional office, the afternoon light slanting through the blinds and capturing the dust motes floating lazily in the air. Her phone rested silently on the desk for a little period before buzzing again. Jack Brennan's name illuminated the screen. She responded with a tightness in her throat that had become familiar recently. Brennan's voice was low and measured, as if he had spent years honing his ability to convey bad news without increasing his own pulse. The dark box was gone. Cullum had grabbed it, and without that leverage, the carefully devised escape plan was crumbling. Willow's free palm clamped around the edge of the desk, turning her knuckles white. She had been rationing the last of the paralytic doses she and Nina had been giving Drew to keep him quiet. There was nothing left. Time, which had once seemed like something she could control with meticulous falsehoods and doses, had abruptly ran out. Brennan, still determined to assist, suggested something else. An airplane. Tonight. Willow and her children have new identities. Nina may also come if she wanted. Willow closed her eyes and saw the life they had been living in fragments. Drew's eyes staring at her from the wheelchair, the children's inquiries she could never fully answer, and the persistent low-level anxiety that someone would see Drew's recovery gaps and begin asking the wrong questions. She said she'd call Brennan back and ended the conversation. Then she called Nina. Nina responded from the Quartermain property, where the late afternoon sun shone on the lake and the boathouse stood silently against the trees. Scout and Danny had been talking with Drew, attempting, in their youth, to piece together some form of familial harmony. Nina listened with half an ear, her thoughts fixated on the broader issue. When Willow's frantic and strained voice came over the phone, Nina took a step back from the others. Willow presented Brennan's offer in fast, clipped phrases. The airplane. New names. The opportunity to flee before the police, the hospital, or anybody else could put the pieces together. Nina listened without interrupting. Willow concluded and put the decision in her mother's hands. Nina might join them or stay. Willow and the kids were departing that night. Nina hung up the phone and returned her attention to the boathouse. Drew sat in his wheelchair at the edge of the dock, the lake extending out behind him like a dark mirror. Scout and Danny remained nearby, but Nina gently led them away. She told them she'd bring Drew home, and they should go see their grandmother. The children hesitated barely briefly before agreeing. Danny promised Scout that everything would be fine. Scout stared at her father one final time before following her half-brother up the path to the main house. The silence after they went was thick. Nina walked gently towards Drew. Despite his physical constraints, he kept his gaze fixed on her as she approached. When she came to a halt a few feet away, he was able to formulate the long-awaited query. Is this bad news? Nina's expression remained unchanged. Bad for me, she said. Worse for you. She came forward, placed both hands on the wheelchair's handles, and shoved. The chair rolled a short way to the dock's edge before tipping. Drew went for it, the splash crisp and startling in the quiet air. Water engulfed him. Nina stood on the edge, watching the surface crack and then settle again. For a long time, the only sound was the gentle slap of the lake on the pilings. Elsewhere in Port Charles, the day had been developing on its own parallel tracks of anxiety and calm reflection. Valentine Cassadine sat across from Alexis Davis at Bobby's and spoke with the deliberate honesty of someone who understood the fragility of second chances. He apologized for the scrutiny she had faced while he was hiding. Alexis took the apologies without warmth, but without open hatred. She wondered how long he expected his independence to last. Valentine confessed he was fortunate to have been pardoned and that he had tremendous incentives to be on the right side of the law. He did not want the Cassadine estate, only what was properly his. Alexis listened, observing the calculation underlying his remarks while also acknowledging the sincerity of the apologies. General Hospital, GH recap for Friday, July 24th, reveals that Willow Keynes, Caitlin McMullen, planned to flee Port Charles hit a snag while Nina Reeves, Cynthia Watros, took drastic action against Drew Kane, Cameron Matheson. At Bobby's, Valentine Cassadine, James Patrick Stewart, apologized to Alexis Davis, Nancy Lee Grawn, for the scrutiny she was under while he was in hiding and revealed his plan to use the WSB to unfreeze his assets. In Jack Brennan's Chris McKenna office, Jocelyn Jacks, Eden McCoy, was back at work and wound up sitting in on his meeting with Britt Westbourne, Kelly Thibault. Brennan questioned Britt about the missing black box, which she knew nothing about. Britt was late for work as a result, so Elizabeth Baldwin, Rebecca Herbst, reported her for it. Lucas Jones, Van Hansis, also bickered with Britt a bit, so her return to GH remained challenging. Back with Jocelyn, she quizzed Brennan about the black box and suspected this was about recovering his own secrets. Brennan made it clear that the contents of the box were classified, so Jocelyn accepted that. At the Quartermain property, Danny Morgan, Asher Antonizin, showed up with Jason Morgan, Steve Burton, so Rocco Falconeri, Finn Carr, immediately got uncomfortable. After Willow mentioned needing to speak with the WSB about something, that got Jason's attention as she left Drew in Nina's hands. Jason sought a new chapter with Drew and ultimately took Rocco inside for a private conversation.